In this video I'll be making a finger joint or box joint jig for the table saw, featuring a little trick for setting it up so that you get perfect fitting joints every time. Free plans for this are available to everyone at the link in the description box below. I've got an offcut of 18mm plywood that I can use for this. It's a bit stained and messy, but it'll be fine. First I rip a clean edge on the workpiece at the table saw, and then I cut 2 lengths at the miter saw. And while I'm at the miter saw, I'm also going to rotate it to 45 degrees and cut a couple of triangle support pieces. I'm going to need to take the tips off these triangles to get them to fit, so I mark them up and make the cuts at the bandsaw. I added some wood glue and put the 2 panels together to form an L-shaped workpiece, and add a few 18 gauge brad nails to hold it while the glue sets. And then I can glue on my triangles, which will help to reinforce it and help keep the front panel at 90 degrees to the base panel. I had a look through my scraps of wood to find something that I can use to make some runners, and I found a piece of sapele. I ripped 2 pieces down to a couple of millimeters less than the depth of my miter slots, which happened to be about 8mm for my saw, and then ripped them down to width to fit inside the slots, and mine measure about 19mm. It took a couple of attempts to get the perfect fit, and after shaving off a tiny amount they slotted in nicely, running smoothly forwards and back with no side-to-side play. I placed a few washers at the bottom of the miter slots to lift up the runners higher than the surface of the table. And then I offer up a reliable framing square that I trussed up to the blade, making sure that it's not touching any of the carbide teeth. I apply some super glue to the runners and position the main body of the jig at 90 degrees to the blade. Everyone seems to use activator with super glue these days, but I haven't got any of that, so I just apply some weights and wait a few minutes. While that's gluing, I can swap my usual table saw blade out for a wider 6mm grooving blade that I bought recently, which has flat teeth, so it's perfect for finger joints. You don't have to use this specific blade though, any flat tooth blade will do. With the glue set, I drill a pilot hole with a countersink to fix the runners in place, and I used a wider bit just to drill through the runners, just to prevent them from potentially splitting when the screws go in. And then I added a bit of candle wax to the runners and the base of the jig. This is just going to help it glide smoothly. With the jig ready to use, I can then make a cut, and the height of the blade doesn't really matter at this point. I can then rip down another piece of wood to the size of the blade kerf, which is 6mm in this case. The first one I cut was a little bit too loose, as you can see here, so I set the fence and tried again. And that one was a little bit too tight, so I shaved a bit more off it. And third time lucky, a nice snug fit but not too snug, which is important. Now for the clever part, which is going to help me get perfect fitting finger joints. I grabbed a piece of MDF to use for the front fence. It doesn't have to be MDF though, I'm just using what I had to hand. I set my blade height to just under 12mm. The reason I chose 12mm is because that's the minimum thickness of material that I'm ever likely to use with this jig. If you think you might want to cut some finger joints into some thinner material, 9mm for example, then set your blade height to just under 9mm, but I'm going with 12. I offer up the front fence and make a cut through it. And I can then put in the piece which I ripped to the blade kerf earlier on. And I'm going to need to rip a little bit off the width of this piece. I really should have done that when I had my usual table saw blade fitted earlier on, and I'm telling you that so that if you make this, you can learn from my mistakes and you don't have to swap blades so much. That was a good fit, and now I can cut off a little pin which will be added to the jig, but I'm going to keep and use both of these pieces. The pin gets glued in place into the kerf cut. And while my regular blade is fitted in the table saw, I'm also going to trim off a bit from the front fence so that it's the same height as the main body of the jig. I want to keep this jig as small and compact as possible so it doesn't take up much space. Then I get my grooving blade set up again in the saw, and this is the part where I'm going to set the jig up for accuracy. I'm using the offcut piece from the kerf piece to position the pin on the jig away from the blade, and I'm making sure that it's touching the teeth on the blade. Once I'm happy that it's positioned correctly, I'm going to add a couple of clamps to hold the fence in place. And then I grab a scrap piece which I can use to test how the jig performs. By the way, I'd recommend clamping the workpiece to the jig for each pass through the blade for maximum safety, rather than using your fingers to hold the workpiece like the idiot in this video. So I butt that up to the pin, make a cut, and then push that kerf cut over the pin, make another cut, and so on until all of the cuts are made. I did that onto 2 workpieces, and then I can test the fit, and I lucked out here and managed to get a perfect fit first time. I wouldn't want the fit to be any tighter than this, as these fingers will swell a little bit once you get glue on them, so I wanted them to go together with a little bit of resistance but not too much. I added some wood glue and secured these together, and then cut off the excess and sanded everything flush, and this is how it turned out. The best thing about making the jig in this way with that separate front fence is that if the test fit had been too loose, I could undo the clamps, move the pin and the front fence a tiny amount away from the blade, clamp it again, make another cut some more test pieces and do another test fit. If they were too tight, I'd need to move the pin a tiny bit closer to the blade and repeat the same steps. So you can really dial it in to get it cutting exactly how you want it. But as I was happy with my fit on the first attempt, I drilled through and secured the front fence to the jig permanently while the clamps were still in place. A couple of tips about using this jig. Firstly, you want to set the height of the blade to the thickness of the material that you're using or a tiny bit higher. So in this example, my material is about 14mm thick, so I set my blade height to just over 14mm and make the cuts. The first cuts are made by offering it up to the pin, as I did earlier, and then making the cuts. But the second thing to point out is that once you've cut your first piece, you can rotate it and put the first cut that you made over the pin, and then you can offer up what will be the mating piece to that, and that will give you the perfect starting point to make the cuts to that mating piece. And that's all there is to it. I made this jig for a particular project, as I'm in the process of making a bespoke desk, which you're seeing a quick preview of right now. Project video for that will be available soon. If it's available already, I'll leave a link to it in the description box below. As I mentioned at the start of the video, plans for this jig are available to everyone for free at the link in the description box below. And the plans feature an improved version of what I built in this video, just with a few tweaks to some of the dimensions. Not that there's anything wrong with the one that I made, it's just that I was working with scraps of wood and using what I had to hand. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe for more weekly woodworking videos. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can donate via PayPal, or you can get early access to my videos, exclusive content, free project plans and cut lists, and a name credit at the end of my videos via Patreon or YouTube channel membership. Links down below in the description box. Thanks for watching.